Welcome to Season 2 of the Cultural Cultivators podcast by Poleng Creative and Kultivate Labs, where we delve into various aspects of film culture and speak with entrepreneurs, leaders, artists, and creators who are shaping and pushing the boundaries of their respective fields. Join us as we cultivate a greater appreciation for the beauty and complexity of the film experience. Follow us on all social media platforms at Poleng Creative with a K, or on Instagram at cultural.cultivators, also with a K. Desi Danganan is a community development leader and social entrepreneur serving as the executive director of Kultivate Labs. He focuses on building a thriving arts and business ecosystem in San Francisco's SOMA Pilipinas, the Filipino Cultural Heritage District. Through key initiatives like Undiscovered SF, a night market that promotes film culture and businesses, and Poleng Creative, which supports creatives through grants and incubation, Desi is fostering a vibrant community. Programs like Couple Gardens, a wellness and cultural space, and Seed Network, which connects entrepreneurs of color to resources, all contribute to creating a sustainable ecosystem that drives both artistic and economic growth in SOMA Pilipinas. In this conversation, Desi explains the origin of Kultivate Labs and its role alongside other community organizations to create a Filipino cultural district in San Francisco.
One of our clients early on as Plinth agency was Cool Arts, and Cool Arts is, one of our premier legacy art institutions here in SOMA Pilipinas. And Alleluia was telling me that there was a movement of creating a Filipino cultural district, and I should go check out the community meeting about it. So I went because I was curious. I was trained by Don Mabalon about why is there no Filipino town? So I wanted to know what was up with this, and it was very inspiring. It was a really great presentation by Lorna about the values of this community, the history of Filipinos in San Francisco, and it kind of just stopped there. And as a person from a design and business background, I automatically wanted to know, well, what is it going to look like, and what about the role of business? And I looked around the room, and there was a beautiful cross-section of longtime residents, stakeholders, nonprofit professionals, but what was missing in the room were design and business professionals. So I knew that if we were going to pull this off as a community, that we needed to enlarge the table and make sure that there were other voices in our community that were going to be able to participate. And that was the formation of Kultivate Labs, because the way the cultural district was coming together is that, SOMA Pilipinas didn't just appear from nowhere. There are a lot of long-standing orgs here in SOMA Pilipinas that have been doing the work of community development. There are groups like SOMCAN that do workers' rights and tenants' protections. There's West Bay and UP that focus in on making sure that the youth are taken care of, so on and so forth. So the strategy of the cultural district was going to be divided up amongst the long-standing CBOs, except the problem with how SOMA Pilipinas was being developed is that there was no CBO that had a focus and its pulse on small business and economic development.
Also in this conversation, Desi reminisces on Poleng Lounge, a groundbreaking restaurant and nightlife space he ran in San Francisco, some of the challenges Kultivate Labs has faced in its mission to build a Filipino cultural and economic corridor, and how this work in SOMA Pilipinas has impacted and influenced other Filipino communities throughout the diaspora. You can follow Desi and make a donation to the Kultivate Labs crowdfunding campaign at cultivatelabs.org. Kultivate is spelled with a K. Well, thank you, Desi, for joining us today. This is a very special episode of Cultural Cultivators. We are with the founder of Kultivate Labs. I want to thank you for coming into this space and doing this live with us, Desi. And before we begin, we always ask all our guests this question: which ancestor or anyone who has transitioned on would you like to call into the space and conversation today?
I will call in Don Mabalon. She's actually in her window right over there, because when I was a young high school graduate, She taught me the importance of creating Filipino enclaves. And then the other ancestor I want to call in is Marco Gistellana, who helped kind of co-create a lot of the programs of Kultivate Labs.
I don't know if I ever told you this, but Marco is actually the first person I met from Kultivate Labs.
Ah.
I had a meeting with Gail at Trellis before it was Trellis.
Yeah.
And you guys were all meeting there. And I remember his hat.
Yeah, it's very iconic.
Yeah. I remember meeting him and Gail was like, yeah, they're doing really cool things. They run Undiscovered. They're doing amazing things in SOMA. Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know, probably like 7 years later, here we are.
Oh, wow. That far.
Yeah. It was like the beginning of Undiscovered.
Yep.
All right. So I don't remember meeting you, but I do remember vivid memories of Poleng Lounge.
Yes, the infamous Poleng Lounge.
Partying there, doing stand-up there. You guys had comedy open nights there. Mm-hmm. It was named one of SF's top 10 restaurants and lounge back in 2006, my party heyday.
Yeah, that's 18 years ago now.
Oh my gosh, Don't say that out loud. I feel so old. But what was your vision for that restaurant and lounge, and how do you think it contributed to the promotion of Filipino culture?
Yeah, I mean, Poleng Lounge is like an evolution of my career and lifestyle. You know, back in the early 2000s, after the dot-com bubble burst, I was a club promoter, and that's how I was earning a living. At some point, when you get really big with events at nightclubs, you hit a juncture in the road. It's either you open up your own venue or you start a festival. We chose to open up our own venue, and that was Poleng Lounge. And so we didn't want it to be a straight nightclub. We wanted to be kind of a stepping stone into a more mature lifestyle. So we wanted to integrate food and tea. And so Poleng in Balinese is actually the interplay of duality, like living life, knowing that there are extremes in life, the good and the bad. So we had the good with the food and the tea, and the bad with the music and the alcohol. And so that was like a point in life at that time.
And then at a certain point, I remember I moved to New York, and during that time, Poleng Lounge actually closed. I was really sad to see that happen. And I know you mentioned before in past interviews, you sort of went through like a midlife crisis during that closure, Poleng Lounge, and then also Summit SF, which was a coffee shop you had opened.
That was super traumatic, you know, because Poleng was like the center of gravity for our community. You know, it was award-winning. Everyone threw their events there. People met their future husbands and wives there. So it was kind of a big deal that it closed. And I was super eager to start again and prove that I wasn't like a one-hit wonder. And I was given the opportunity to start the Summit, which was another evolution. It wasn't like a nightclub anymore. It was a cafe co-working space. It was a place for people who had ideas and visions and ventures to like work on and, you know, do it in an environment that like really emphasized craft culture. Unfortunately, I got into bed with really bad VCs. I call them the vulture capitalists. They had all kinds of loopholes in their investment agreements that took advantage of the success of the Summit. I can't put all the blame on them. I also was a bit immature in my management style back then, and I made some mistakes too, you know, compounding that. And then that was also a really visible project in the mission at the time, and that imploded within 2 years. So, you know, I found myself like having two really, you know, on the surface very successful businesses all of a sudden close. And that was a big wake-up call. What was even harder about that situation is that I had friends who invested in Poleng. It didn't work out, but they still believed in me. And then they doubled down and invested in the Summit too, and I wasn't able to return their investment. So, you know, for a while, like I was holding my head down in a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. One, not returning my friends' investments, and number two, of like being a failure. So it took a long time for me to kind of reconcile like how to move forward. It was maybe about 4 years before I could summon the courage of taking another risk again. And the key to that was learning to forgive myself. I had to learn how to forgive myself to be able to also learn from the mistakes, understand where I was strong and where I was weak, and, you know, really kind of move forward and like, hey, I can't do everything. Like one of the things that I'm really weak at is like, I understand the premise of accounting, I understand how to read numbers, but I should not be doing the fine details of accounting. So now I bring in professional accountants to like help me with my ventures. Those were kind of like the life lessons I learned, was like forgiveness and also learning from the mistakes.
It's huge. So then after that, what inspired you to create Kultivate Labs, a nonprofit organization?
There was a stepping stone to Kultivate. Like, I didn't jump into the nonprofit world right away. My next venture was a Plinth agency. It's a branding and marketing firm. And so we operated as an agency for about 4 or 5 years before I started Kultivate Labs. And we stumbled upon starting Kultivate Labs only because of the creation of SOMA Pilipinas. One of our clients early on as Plinth agency was Cool Arts. And Cool Arts is, one of our premier legacy art institutions here in SOMA Pilipinas. And Alleluia was telling me that there was a movement of creating a Filipino cultural district, and I should go check out the community meeting about it. So I went because I was curious. I was trained by Don Mabalon about like, why is there no Filipino town? So I wanted to know what was up with this. And it was very inspiring. It was a really great presentation by Lorna about like the values of this community, the history of Filipinos in San Francisco. And it kind of just stopped there. And as a person from like a design and business background, I automatically wanted to know, well, what is it going to look like? And what about the role of business? And I looked around the room and there was a beautiful cross section of longtime residents, stakeholders, nonprofit professionals. But what was like missing in the room were like design and business professionals. So I knew that if we were going to pull this off as a community, that we needed to enlarge the table and make sure that there are other voices in our community that were going to be able to participate. And that was the formation of Kultivate Labs, because the way the cultural district was coming together is that, SOMA Pilipinas didn't just like appear from nowhere. There are a lot of longstanding orgs here in SOMA Pilipinas that have been doing the work of community development. There are groups like SOMCAN that do workers' rights and tenants' protections. There's like West Bay and UP that focus in on making sure that the youth are taken care of, so on and so forth. So the strategy of the cultural district was going to be divided up amongst like the long-standing CBOs, except the problem with how SOMA Pilipinas was being developed is that there was no CBO that had a focus and its pulse on small business and economic development.
So you saw the hole and you're ready to fill it.
Yeah, just like any kind of entrepreneur, you see the possibility and then, you find the courage and get excited and kind of go for it.
And so how did you experience in strategic branding and crowdfunding? How did that also shape the role at Kultivate Labs?
I came into community development already with an assumption and a bias that there are a lot of high achieving Filipinos out there that are not engaged with community development for one reason or another. One of it could be like just the way community development is about sacrifice, and some folks don't want to sacrifice. Then there's also another kind of segment of our community that can identify with how Filipino culture is being portrayed either in the mainstream media or by our community. So I knew that if we were going to like really create a movement, that we needed to bring these individuals into the fold. And so at Kultivate Labs, we're very like intentional about creating programs that are branded a certain way to touch upon these psychological needs and triggers. A great example would be Undiscovered. There are already a lot of existing Filipino festivals, but we wanted to create a Filipino festival that was purely grounded on the Fil-Am experience. And, at that time, Filipino festivals were more focusing on traditional Filipino culture, which is great and it's very important. But there is a difference between Fil-Ams and Filipinos. And the biggest thing that you can really point out is that, Fil-Ams are into like hip hop culture. And so when we created Undiscovered, there was a very dominant theme of hip hop. Another thing that we did in terms of the branding of Undiscovered is it's not in Tagalog. Because, to be real, not a lot of Fil-Ams speak Tagalog. And so, if we made it super Tagalog, they would not even understand it. And then that would already kind of like start to create triggers for them not to want to get involved. And, another thing too is that we also wanted to create an air of mystery of what they were going to discover, because SOMA Pilipinas at that time was brand new and no one knew what is a Filipino cultural district. So the event was to kick it off and then start to drive the imagination of what is possible in SOMA Pilipinas.
I remember growing up with things like Bastahan, which is like 30 plus years, street festivals like Barrio Fiesta back in the day, Fisherman's Wharf. So to come back from New York and experience my first Undiscovered, I think it was this beautiful evolution of what street festivals, what community programming, what Filipino-Americans are now doing in the diaspora. And also what people like you and other leaders like Gina, Marco, like this newer, fresher blood, let's just say, are injecting into the community. So one, it was refreshing. And two, it just felt like coming back home and seeing all these new faces, but also very familiar faces in the community. It gave me hope for this, for San Francisco. Because when I left, tech was, in my eyes, destroying the culture.
What year was this when you left?
2011.
2011, yeah. That was peak. That was the start of the peak of Tech 2.0.
Yeah, of Twitter moving in and YouTube and Facebook, all the tech folks. And so coming back and seeing Undiscovered, specifically in SOMA, I think was a beautiful thing because, like you said, it brought people, and not just in San Francisco, people from all over the Bay Area.
Even nationwide.
Flying in from all over the
Wisconsin,
country.
Florida.
Utah. And I think it reminded folks the importance of having a cultural corridor that has brought us things like Black Creative, Couple Gardens, and even Seed Network. So can you just talk a little bit about how Undiscovered contributes to this growth and brought programs like Seed Network?
Raquel, our director of SOMA Pilipinas, called Undiscovered like our people power moment. We showed the world, our stakeholders here in San Francisco, that there are Filipinos and we can come out in droves. And when we come out in masses, that we can do extraordinary things. For example, the first Undiscovered was at the San Francisco Mint. We were probably the only community group outside of the San Francisco Historical Society that actually opened the door to this venerated venue that no one has ever been in. We were able to figure out the logistics and the financing to do it. So Undiscovered was really kind of like that momentum that was going to kickstart a movement, but it wasn't going to be the only thing that was going to create SOMA Pilipinas. Undiscovered has a very distinct purpose, bringing a lot of different emerging retail and food ventures together, and also showcasing film, arts, and culture as the attraction. Then we have to build programs on top of that because, the cultural district doesn't stop because we have a festival on the street. We now have to start to look at the high-performing vendors at the market and then start to support them so they can grow into brick and mortar businesses, because our ultimate intent in Undiscovered and Kultivate Labs is to start putting businesses in these empty storefronts here in SOMA Pilipinas. So the Seed Network is purely focusing on entrepreneurs, supporting the ones that are already here, and then helping new ones get a foothold in SOMA Pilipinas. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We take cues from tech incubators, not in the sense where we'll give you $10,000 and take 10% of your company, but we may invest $10,000 to help you sign a new lease. It may involve, a lot of Filipino entrepreneurs aren't well capitalized, so they can't pay for a lot of professional services that they would often need to be a fully supported business. So that could be you're not incorporated. Well, we'll take care of that. You don't have an accounting system. Let's build that out for you. So those are some of the services we provide through the Seed Network.
And you've had hella success stories, right? Like Abaca Restaurant, Sarap Shop, the most recent, I'm just naming people also who've been on our podcast, Jen Ban from B2N.
Yep.
Who just opened right across the way near 5M Park, tattoo shop and art gallery. So I love this idea of paying it forward and helping I think all of the programs here help push the culture forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole ecosystem. That's why we're kind of like a laboratory, Kultivate Labs, because we're going to come up with new ideas to create this ecosystem. We're rooted in social justice, and we understand that capitalism doesn't work for all communities, but how can we take capitalism and turn it on its head? And, the way we're doing that is creating these interlocking programs that not only support entrepreneurs, but the artists and culture bearers of SOMA Pilipinas. And so that's kind of the unique dance that we do in Kultivate Labs, is bringing two groups that seem really disparate, but finding a way to create harmony and a symphony with them. And then on top of that, we then go and create spaces. And then we have workforce development programs like the Brown Thought Academy to teach the next generation of digital marketers, because that's one of the things that we've identified, is that if we're going to be successful in our work, we have to amplify our messages and voices far and wide to get people to come out.
Yeah, and that's another great thing that Kultivate Labs does, is the marketing. I feel like that's one of our biggest strengths, is marketing. It means more than just space, like physical space. It's this virtual world. And I think that's how we gain new attendees. We gain listeners for the podcast. We get peak interest from all over the world.
I mean, what we do is like, I really see it as UX design. I come from the tech world, and that was like, my reference point in like the work that we do. But, we're creating this, like, they call it the customer journey, right? Of how people will perceive the cultural district, how they'll perceive our events. And then, it doesn't stop with a shiny flyer or a really well-designed webpage, but then like, what is the experience when you're actually in the cultural district and interacting with folks, and like the unsaid community agreements that we have, like when you interact with people. Even more important than our outreach is like these connections that we create and moments for folks. The creating of the moments is probably the most powerful thing that we create at Kultivate Labs, because anyone can do a really cool flyer. Anyone can throw a hell of money into like digital ads, but can you create moments in time that inspire people? Can you create moments in time where people feel connected? I mean, that's true human connection and human inspiration. That is the promise of SOMA Pilipinas.
I think it's Maya Angelou that says, people are not going to remember what you say, but how you made them feel. And one of the most amazing programs that have come out of Kapwa Gardens was a program and a venue space that actually started during the pandemic, and it was Kapwa Gardens. And I have to give a huge gratitude and thank you to you, because Kapwa Gardens was the space that I held my first event coming back from New York, called Kapwa Cares. And that's how I actually formally met you.
Yep.
Through Marissa. Shout out to Marissa at Kapwa Gardens. But it was intentionally built during the pandemic as a healing space.
Yeah.
It was literally just a parking lot. Mm-hmm. And you infused art, you infused plants, you infused art and culture and music for our community. Can you talk more about that inspiration, and maybe just how did the local politicians and community contribute to its development?
Yeah, I mean, the lead up to Kapwa Gardens was actually a short-lived program called the Undiscovered Court. So in 2019, we got a little bit of money from Zendesk in the city of San Francisco to activate a corner of a parking lot to see what we could do. And so we wanted to experiment with programming that didn't just involve DJs, or let's do something around sports. And so we created a half-court basketball court, and, we made it kind of an immersive visual experience based on vintage sales, and built it with 75 volunteers, and was super successful, but short-lived. And then an RFP came around for the community to activate a parking lot that would one day become senior housing, but the city didn't want to see it sit around and be empty until senior housing was built. So we won that RFP. And then we had a lot of ideas of why don't we supersize the Undiscovered Court and turn it into a night market? And then the pandemic hit, and everything changed. Close contact sports like basketball were essentially illegal at that time. And the city was going through a massive shift and, homelessness was on the rise. And so the city actually wanted to take that parking lot and turn it into a safe camping site for the unhoused, which is a very noble thing to do. But the community here in SOMA Pilipinas disagreed because, number one, we already feel as a community that we have a high concentration of the unhoused already here. And number two, that we actually have a better idea for that parking lot. So we sat down with our landscape architects, Marcus and Christina, and we're like, all right, our original ideas are actually illegal. Let's just pivot and go with the whole idea of creating a COVID gathering site. And what would that look like? So, we kind of originally designed Kapwa Gardens to have a lot of social distancing. We had very stringent check-in processes. And we also kind of framed it as a place for people to heal during the pandemic. And healing for us had 3 different components. It was mental, physical, and economic healing. So the kind of mental was getting out of your apartment and stop watching Netflix and actually work with your hands and do something good for the community. The physical was the future programming at Kapwa Gardens for martial arts and yoga. And then economic was being able to create a outdoor space that was, one, safe, but also two, could host events during the pandemic.
Yeah, I remember we were one of the first events, Kapwa Cares. We had to limit our attendance. We had to make sure people were wearing masks. We had the COVID tracing. Mm-hmm. So I feel like Kapwa Gardens was sort of the safe space, healing space for people to gather outside and really see each other again.
Yep.
Because we were in lockdown for so long. And it provided a space to connect with people. And I remember being there and being like, wow, this is weird. Mm-hmm. Being in person with people and, interacting with each other, but it was needed.
Yep.
And I feel like that's so much, again, of what Kultivate Labs does is fulfill a need that the community has.
Yeah. And, we were really fortunate, too, is that there were city officials that actually saw that, we were onto something. So at the time, Matt Haney, who's now an assembly member, was our district supervisor, and he fought for us, the city was going to take it away from us twice. And he said, no, that's not going to happen.
And so what are your main initiatives now that you are implementing and driving for the cultural preservation of SOMA Pilipinas and also economic growth?
San Francisco is going through a really interesting transition point right now. It's been a few years since the pandemic has ended, but we have not fully recovered. And the economics of San Francisco have changed. Pre-pandemic vacancy rates were in the single digits, especially here in South of Market, because this is the home of Tech 2.0. And it was very expensive to find space. Now, fast forward to today, the world is turned upside down where tech companies don't need to go to the office. They all work from home. So now there's huge vacancy rates. In San Francisco, the vacancy rate now is 36%. In South of Market, some parts are 50% or more. So rates have dropped tremendously. So this is actually a golden opportunity for our community to finally lean in and take up space so we can actually build out SOMA Pilipinas. So a lot of our initiatives right now are really kind of focused in on preparing people to take space in SOMA Pilipinas. Great example is, like you said, Jen Ban of B2Win. Jen came here as a artist resident, had some entrepreneurial leanings and found out about the Seed Network. And then, we prepped her, Saint, and Jerome to get their own space. Directly across from where we are in Balai is the former Westfield Mall. They've hit some rough spots and there's, 50% or more vacancy rate. So our big initiative in 2025 is to start placing more Filipino businesses and organizations and projects into the mall so that we have another kind of community anchor and hub in SOMA Pilipinas to really fulfill this vision of a cultural corridor on Mission Street.
So I know you talked about the pandemic and how it sort of flipped things on its head. We're seeing the opportunities, but we're also facing the challenges. One of the challenges being that because tourism has been low, the hotel tax has also been affected in San Francisco. And so San Francisco AC has slashed their budget for all of the nonprofits that were benefiting from that tax. On top of that, what are also some of the most challenging moments you've experienced as an ED of Kultivate Labs?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, currently right now it's financial. That's a big strain. City of San Francisco is still expensive to live in. And, with inflation, the cost of living has gone up, yet our main source of funding has been chopped like every other nonprofit. That's been challenging for us. But, looking back and peeling off the layers and looking back at like being an ED of a young org, some of the most challenging things actually come from our community. We've faced a lot of criticism over the years. In the early days of Undiscovered, one of the biggest criticism was that we were secretly going to gentrify SOMA Pilipinas. And that was kind of a big eye-opening and wake-up call for me, and also kind of a parable or a cautionary tale of economic development. Obviously, we're not trying to gentrify SOMA Pilipinas, but the big fear was, which has a lot of truth to it, is that if we make SOMA Pilipinas a viable, enriching, cool place to live, that the real estate values are going to go up and that Filipinos would inadvertently get pushed out. And so that's kind of like the double-edged sword of the work that we do. If we're not careful, we may displace ourselves. So that was one big fear. But really the way we see the work that we're doing is that we're not just trying to create a more livable, enriching community. We're actually trying to address income inequality by creating more entrepreneurs, by helping develop artists that are more entrepreneurial. What we're trying to do is increase everyone's like wage earning potential so that they can live in SOMA Pilipinas. The other key thing that we're trying to do is that as this community gets built up, products and services are going to need to be consumed. And who should provide that? It should be Filipinos in the cultural district. And so really what we're doing is turning economic development on its head so it works for our community. That was one really big issue pre-pandemic, was like, are we a gentrifying force? I mean, most recently too, like I got criticized like online by an influential member of the Filipino hip hop community saying that I was the biggest traitor to our community. And why did he say that? Because he did not agree with our curation of our 50 years of hip hop event for Undiscovered. It's hard. It's hard when like you're trying to do the right thing and people are perceiving it completely 180 of what you're trying to do. And it becomes very public too. People talk, people will spread rumors, but like in doing this work, you got to have a tough skin and you got to really have like a strong North Star so you don't get like distracted by the noise and the haters and the crabs. This is kind of a running theme in our communities. Like as different individuals or orgs start to rise, crab mentality will pop up to try to bring you down.
Yeah, so we've talked about crab mentality a lot on this podcast. And I will say this, I think Kristen has said that from Sprout Shops beautifully, that we are sort of this bridge. And you said it earlier, the bridge between the older generation and the younger generation. And we're having to make choices that are hard choices. We're not going to make everyone happy. The titas and titos are going to have criticism. The younger generation is going to have, their judgments and opinions too. But we can just do the best we can given with what we have. And just to speak a little bit on that, people don't understand sometimes too that we don't make these decisions as an organization to leave people out. It's simply these people were busy or we couldn't afford them.
Yeah.
That's just it. That's just the fact of the matter. So for people to sort of hurl insults or negative things out there about you or us, I think people need to be more informed on what's really the facts of the situation rather just assumptions.
Yeah. Assumptions, internet rumors, but also like we're really living these like really divisive times where people don't talk to one another, right? They would rather just be comfortable in reading what they see on the internet and taking that as truth and not actually creating a one-to-one dialogue with somebody to truly understand what their position is or perspective, so on and so forth. And another thing too is that like we're starting to live in very polarized times where people will be comfortable in just reading what they read on the internet and assuming that's truth instead of creating real dialogue and truth seeking and talking to the other side, learning their perspective. You know, things have become so binary, so black and white that if you're not 100% aligned with all of my views, then you're now my enemy. And that should not be the case. You know, there are many shades and dimensions when it comes to collaboration. I may agree with somebody 70% of the time, and the other 30% of the time, I don't really roll with them. But that shouldn't mean that they're my enemy. There are ways that we can work together. And then, you know, like any other family, then you understand that, hey, you're also my crazy uncle, and I'm not going to talk to you about these things because your position's already hard, but I can work with you on X, Y, and Z.
It's one, having the empathy and grace to have open discussions and discourse, but also understanding healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're currently doing a crowdfunding campaign as Kultivate Labs. How's this been coming along, and how can folks donate? We have listeners from Guam, Philippines, Virginia. How can they help Kultivate Labs and create this cultural corridor where maybe one day they can fly to San Francisco and experience themselves?
So we kicked off our crowdfunding campaign with an event called Haraya up in the Salesforce Tower. It was a really beautiful event. We had a sold out room of like 250 people. And, you know, really, to be honest, like going into that event, a big activity was doing a pledge drive. And it was something that we've never done as an organization. And I would always remember what my mom and my dad would tell me is that Filipinos don't support other Filipinos. There's a lot of mistrust. So I'm like, man, going into this and like asking for money, like right there and then, is it going to be crickets? Are people just going to like turn their backs? Are they just going to walk away and then I'm going to look like an idiot? But it was the exact opposite. Right away, people started raising their paddles. You know, we had a goal of that night of raising $12,000. And then we raised about $16,000, which is amazing. So, you know, we have an overall goal of raising $80,000 in the next couple of months. We're almost a third of the way there. And if you really believe in the movement that we're trying to create here in SOMA Pilipinas, you know, please go to cultivatelabs.org/crowdfunding and you can find multiple ways that you can support our cause.
And we have awesome gifts too.
That's right. Beanies, stickers, the undiscovered
VIP experiences.
Yep. Yeah.
If you want to experience Poleng Creative in our workshops, we have workshop bundle, which also may include our master classes, which have helped a lot of our artists go from struggling to thriving.
Yep. It's not just like we're fundraising for this organization. What we're really trying to do is build this behavior in our community of reinvestment. You know, growing up like Asian American, like you look at the other Asian Americans and see how well they're doing. You know, the Koreans, the Japanese, the Chinese, you know, like being Filipino-American, like I always had this chip on my shoulder of like, where are we in the grand spectrum of the API world? And, you know, one of the things that really stand out with other communities is that they invest back, that they loan money to their community. They'll donate to their community. They'll lean in when the time comes. And as a community, we need to start doing the same thing. What's been really hindering Filipinos from doing that, from investing back, is mistrust from the homeland, right? Corruption from politicians in the Philippines, misspent money. But we're in a new era. We're a new generation. We don't have to be defined by those traumas anymore. Some of us are actually very fortunate to be of economic means. You know, there are many well-off Filipinos now that have the capacity to give a little bit back.
Yeah, and giving back So Kultivate Labs doesn't just mean to our culture, it's also giving to the artists that we contribute to, giving to the entrepreneurs that are, populating the cultural corridor. It's giving to not just us. I feel like it's giving to a community that we're building and continuing to help thrive in SOMA.
Yeah. And, why this community is special and why should others outside of the Bay Area want to get involved and want to support is that we're really trying to shift the narrative of what it means to become Filipino-American. When historians look back at this traumatic point in San Francisco, they're going to note that the Filipino community learned to lean in, use their superpowers, and help develop a recovery for San Francisco that's going to be equitable and a framework that could actually be used in other communities. Like the work that we're doing here in SOMA Pilipinas is being watched by other communities and it's being replicated, which is awesome. Great example, the Cultivation Festival in Canada.
Winnipeg.
In Winnipeg,
Shout out to our folks in Winnipeg, Canada.
They are very honest in saying that, they've been inspired by us, which is awesome because we're not trying to gatekeep anything. There's no secret sauce to what we do. It's really a movement that other people can take in their communities, and you don't have to be Filipino to benefit from the work that we do here at Kultivate Labs.
Yeah, I remember having a phone call with the owner of Cultivation or the head of Cultivation Festival, and she was just going on and on and on about how much they look to us for inspiration, how, they even looked at our logo and try to do something similar for their own Instagram and logo. And so it was inspiring and empowering. Jelaine from Cambio & Co. talks about ecosystem building. And we had this really great discussion about, yes, we're all creating these ecosystems, but I think the next step is connecting them all, right? Globally, so that we understand we're not in these silos. We're building communities, but we're also part of a global community together. In my eyes, is also sort of planting seeds for this next generation.
Yep. Living in Kapwa.
Living in Kapwa. So we talked about Winnipeg, Canada, but how are folks locally inspired by Kultivate Labs and Undiscovered?
Speaking of Undiscovered, Undiscovered was the first night market in San Francisco, and we proved that night markets, block parties, festivals of that sort were a great economic development tool for communities. And so 8 years ago, we were the only one. Fast forward today, there are at least 4 different night markets in San Francisco funded by the city because they saw the learnings of what we did and then wanted to apply that to other communities as well.
What's one of them?
Bhangra Beats Night Market, Chinatown Night Market, Sunset Night Market. DFT is essentially a night market, and as disclosure, I'm also part of the DFT team. As Plinth agency, my other hat. Through our events, we bring over 35,000 people to the cultural district annually. And with that people power, we're able to develop economic opportunities for our community. Over the past several years, we have tracked the sales of our vendors, and we've injected more than $1 million in revenue for our community to see businesses grow and jumpstart in their evolution.
You've not only given to entrepreneurs and artists in that way, but also Poleng Creative has given grants and artist stipends to many, many artists here in the Bay Area. Do you know those numbers?
I believe at least $200,000 that we've distributed to our artists through Balai. And then there's also Kapwa Gardens and Undiscovered. There's another $300,000 that have been distributed through artist fees. And part of making community development work is that we have to understand community development isn't about sacrifice. We have to pay people appropriately. And, we have to come at this not by subtraction, but by addition. We have to really live in a world or a mindset of abundance.
And I think that's what attracted me to this role as the program manager at Poleng Creative, is that this organization understands the importance of changing mindset, not coming from fear and scarcity like most nonprofits, but coming from an abundant mindset, and a mindset with the intention of kapwa, of connection, of building bridges, and really thriving. And we can't thrive if we're stuck in the barrel. We have to just break through that barrel and have a better understanding of what's possible for us to thrive as a community, as a culture, as a people.
And that starts with paying our employees a living wage. And so I'm putting my hand out to the community so that I can pull my brothers and sisters of Kultivate Labs up from the AMI of $96,000 up into the stratosphere of 7-figure salaries.
Hey. All right. What are you currently geeking over, Desi?
I geek over a lot of different things. Musically, right now, it's city pop. I also tend to gravitate towards like certain in-person events. I like to be anonymous. I like to expose myself to communities that are on the fringe. So sometimes you may find me at parties like Deaf Guild on a Monday night. Goth culture too, kind of like a repressed Japanese salaryman where I need to go and let loose into the darkness for now.
Well, thank you so much, Desi, for joining us. It was great to hear about all the intentions behind Kultivate Labs and also the vision of it going forward.
Desi Danganan and the folks at Kultivate Labs have crafted their own table, one that honors the unique Phil-Am experience while embracing the broader community. In our conversation, he touched on the power of community development when it's rooted in purpose and intention. And one of the key takeaways, I think, is the importance of designing programs that resonate with people's identities and experiences. He recognized that many high-achieving Phil-Ams were not engaging in community efforts, maybe because traditional models didn't speak to their reality. So through projects like Undiscovered, he sought to bridge that gap by creating experiences that celebrated Phil-Am identity rather than solely focusing on traditional culture. I think this made Undiscovered feel fresh, relevant, and meaningful to folks in the diaspora. Another crucial lesson is how effective community initiatives must be bold and visionary. His work with SOMA Pilipinas showed that creating something truly impactful means pushing boundaries and thinking beyond the status quo. By hosting the first Undiscovered at SF Mint, a venue typically inaccessible to us Filipinos, they made a statement. The Filipino community could not only dream big, but also execute big. And this event was way more than a celebration. It was a demonstration of the community's potential, a catalyst for a movement that would go beyond a single street festival. Finally, Desi reminds us that community growth is sustained through ongoing support and development. While Undiscovered events are important, they are just the beginning. Real transformation happens when there's follow-up. When emerging vendors are nurtured into permanent spaces like the Syrup Shop, and cultural programming evolves into tangible economic and social impact like Belai's Creative Growth Artist Program. The lesson here is that community development is about long-term investment. It's about creating a movement that not only highlights the culture, but also fosters sustainability and empowerment. This table that Kultivate Labs built wasn't just about a place to sit. It's a platform for empowerment and gives emerging artists, vendors, and entrepreneurs a space to stand tall, to showcase their talents, and go beyond what anyone else has envisioned. And like any well-built table, it is sturdy and grounded, supporting a thriving cultural district that's both economically viable and deeply rooted in community identity. I think the ultimate lesson is clear. Instead of asking for permission or waiting for a space to be made for us, we get to create our own. And when we build the table, not only are we setting the stage for our own success, but we are creating room for countless others to thrive alongside us. Cultural Kultivators is hosted by me, Nicole Saliver. You can follow me at Kindred Kapwa on Instagram or follow us at cultural.cultivators. Kultivate is with a K. This podcast is co-produced by John Reyes, Kindred Kapwa, and Balai Creative, and it is a product of Kultivate Labs. Stay in touch at balaicreative.org.